I have recently finished listening to Franz Kafka's Metamorphosis audiobook on YouTube. I have known about this book for a long time, but I only knew it by one single phrase. One morning, Gregory Samsa found himself turned into a cockroach. Perhaps it was a satire meant to show how little attention we pay to our lives. Maybe it was a critique of the corporate world. But after listening to this story, I confess I was not expecting the turn it took. After the family of Greg Samsa slowly dehumanized him and starved him to death, it was apparent that Metamorphosis is a tale of a person who could no longer fit in, and of the cruel treatment he received by his own family, who ultimately buried Greg before his time. As the man did not wake up the final morning of the story, there was a bit of joking, a bit of silence, and a quick disposal of the dead, nameless cockroach. His family breathed a sigh of relief and looked towards a bright future. The most tragic part of the story, at least for me, was that Gregory did completely nothing to deserve such treatment. On the contrary, he was the sole provider for his family, who cared very much about the well-being of his parents and sister. And it was disturbing to see how the attitudes changed after he undergoes the metamorphosis. After giving it some thought, I realized that I am already familiar with a similar story. A short horror manga by Junji Ito titled Slug Girl. It is a story about Yuko, a girl in a family dealing with a slug infestation on their property. She, unsurprisingly for Junji Ito-san's stories, soon found her own tongue turning into a slug. Following that, she became an inconvenience and an object of distress to her parents and even herself. Neither cutting her tongue nor eating salt helped, and soon she got submerged in a bath full of salt. All that was left of Yuko was a slug, wearing her head as a shell. In my mind, this story is almost a perfect reflection of Metamorphosis. I would not be surprised if Junji Ito-san is familiar with works of Franz Kafka. But on the other hand, I'm not sure if they are popular worldwide. Even though in Slug Girl, the object of disdain, aka slugs, was foreshadowed earlier in comparison to Metamorphosis, where the affliction is a sudden occurrence, and the approach that both families took was fairly different, I believe that, in the end, the result and the message are similar, if not actually identical. Before discussing similarities of the stories, I do think it is important to acknowledge where the two differ. Something that I did not think about during my first draft of the script is the interaction between Gregory and his family before he left the room for the first time. Although reactions to him being late for work were different, I think they all relate how each member of the family was concerned if Greg could or could not go to work, which might underline the real family dynamic. Perhaps it adds a layer of disappointment and inability to match the expectations. But let's get back on track. In case of Gregory, he was perfectly happy to adapt to his new circumstance and continue contributing to Samsa family. But Greg is slowly gaslit into believing that he himself is not a human anymore, and most importantly, will never be again, which slowly leads to his demise. Although Greg's family buried him way before his actual death. Despite once being the sole provider for his family, in a matter of a few months, Gregory experienced neglect and became an object of disgust, anger, sadness and disdain. Abandoned and forgotten, amongst other things that you usually don't throw away, but don't have any use for either. In the case of Slug Girl, slugs, or any other phenomenon you could replace them with, are disdained and treated like an issue that must be erased by all means necessary. If I was to offer my uneducated guess, I would imagine it has a lot to do with a tunnel-visioned approach of parents when it comes to constructing future for their children. Or maybe another issue that did not come to my mind. Either way, the girl herself quickly turns to brutal and drastic measures, like self-mutilation, in attempts to rid herself of a slug that replaced her tongue. Of course, this being a horror story, there was no chance for a happy ending, as it serves more as a grotesque cautionary tale. In the end, the girl is as good as dead. She's not even referred to as a girl anymore, but as a slug, the creature taking the priority in identifying her. Even though it is not out of the picture that the treatment of the slug girl originated from the place of a good heart and care, the family was too rigid and tunnel-visioned to seek an alternative solution. If salt doesn't work, we just need to bring more salt. There are many details unique to each story that I would love to discuss, but I think I pointed out larger differences, and now it's time to discuss the similarities. As I mentioned, both stories drive the main character to dehumanization and despair. Both Metamorphosis and Slug Girl show how families of the afflicted, while in different ways and likely with different intentions, put the circumstance beyond the person's control and elevate it to the defining characteristic of said person, driving them into a dark place. In both situations, the individual has been in one way or the other discarded, no matter how important or cherished they used to be. It is especially tragic, considering that in both cases it's the family who abandons their child or brother. In the end of the Slug Girl and in the later part of Metamorphosis, the characters are presented as a distant memory of someone who was likely already forgotten and removed, out of sight and out of mind. Two important points stick out as a sore thumb to me. The inability to accept the circumstance of a person, which may or may not be changed, but certainly was not caused by them or was their fault, and the willingness to ascribe gargantuan value to said circumstance, turning it into the main label by which you define the human, slowly killing them as an individual. Both ideas are incredibly tragic. As people, we put a lot of value in statements like, "You're not a circumstance of your birth," or "You ought not to be defined by your circumstances." In both stories, however, the idea is deconstructed and the value of these statements is presented through the lack of such beliefs. In my opinion, Metamorphosis and Slug Girl serve as reminders that we must not discard our loved ones because of shame or displeasure they might bring us when they hit a low in their life, but instead we should at least try and help them to get back on their feet regardless of circumstance. Even in the face of affliction beyond one's control, we must still try and see the individual that every one of us certainly is. I think it is fascinating how two stories created in different parts of the world and during different times have such a similar narrative. In itself, it is already an interesting idea for a video. But it was not the only reason I decided to make it. After analyzing Metamorphosis, it hit me quite personally and deeply, and I want to talk about why. It is certainly tragic that the families of Yuko and Gregory dehumanized them. It's important that such a valuable community as family does not turn into a destructive place. However, it is not the way we dehumanize others on a daily basis. Both online and surrounded by large crowds, we tend to detest certain people or thoughts, discarding them by using labeling or other methods. I think the quickest way to dehumanize someone is to affiliate them with a political view or a phobia. sticking something on them as if they were an object or some creature, certainly not a human. If you or I were disregarded in such way, as people we would be quite upset and angry. Sadly, I can count many times doing it myself, for what I thought were good reasons. Thus, I am by no means trying to lecture anyone. Quite the opposite. I am not sure that reasons for casually dehumanizing somebody can really be good. It can be convenient and efficient. We rarely want to deal with someone online. We don't often want to have a deep conversation in real life either. But it feels like a defeat to just forfeit the argument, and it feels way better to simply label the other person instead. Then, totally justified in disregarding and dehumanizing the other, we breathe a sigh of relief and walk towards a bright future. Life is not easy, and the time is one of the most valuable things. We will generalize and stereotype to make life easier and protect our peace of mind, our families, and our lives. And I am only able to offer my opinion. If, as individual people, we talked more and labeled less, perhaps less people would be turned into grotesque slugs and cockroaches. And perhaps instead of walking away after disposing of the ugly present in the trash and walking towards the bright future, we could instead appreciate the present for being just as bright. For anyone who stayed until the end, thank you very much. I appreciate your time. Please comment and let me know what you think. My name is Franz Kafka. I am aspiring to become somebody online. I like stories. I like anime and manga. I like games like Elden Ring. I also draw from time to time. You can check my short manga on Webtoon or other works on TikTok and Instagram. I will leave links in the description. I don't know how consistent the uploading of videos will be or the topics. I definitely plan on releasing an Elden Ring lore video, so look forward to that if this is your thing. I'm also learning Japanese, so maybe that could be turned into fun content. But until then, thank you again for visiting this channel, and I hope to prepare something for you again. Sayonara!